little bit more insight into the state of Cuba and what's going on the island and why it has gotten to a point where people are protesting. And so, we live, or we try to live, what is known as the American dream. And part of being an American is having the liberty and the freedom to express yourselves and ourselves. It means that whenever we have a gripe with our government, it means that we have the ability to take to the streets. It means that we have the ability to raise our voices and talk about what it is that is bothering us. But in Cuba, that is not the case. It is illegal to protest. And so to know that people are protesting in a country where it is illegal to do so, it really speaks volumes about where the people are. And so, Enio, could you please speak to us about, what that state is? Because you are here, and I know you have family and friends that are still there. So can you please speak to us about that a little bit?
So I guess I kind of want to preface by saying that for many years, I happen to know some of the people that you may consider slightly higher up in, the social ladder in Cuba. You may say that some of the people that I know are experiencing the best that the Communist Party has to offer. And for many years, they told me that they love Cuba. They would not want to leave Cuba. They were fine there. But recently, things have actually changed. For the first time ever, everyone is in consensus that they just want to get out. Everyone is in a state of lacking. Everyone is in a state of fear. They ran out of food. They ran out of medicine. There's police in every single neighborhood. There's a cop stationed there just looking over neighborhoods for no reason. Even the other day when they sent the boats from Miami to Cuba to do the fireworks, the Cuban government just blocked off an entire section of the main street for no other reason except to not let the Cuban people enjoy those fireworks. They are now taking out the internet. They are arresting people for protesting. And we're seeing sentences of up to 25, 26 years for just going to protest. No vandalism, no arson, nothing of the sorts. Some good connections in Cuba. Some of my good friends shared the disturbing scenes from the people that were actually captured and sent to jail. Men just being put naked up against walls, being told that they were going to be violated in the most obscene ways, beaten. They weren't given medical treatment so that the doctors wouldn't be able to report back on how bad they were beaten. The stores, you can see the pictures. If you have anybody from Cuba, there's no food. There's barely anything that you can actually purchase. And what few things there are, it costs dollars to get. In Cuba, they use something that's not the dollar. They have their own currency called el cu, but it's basically useless because that coin doesn't actually buy you anything in Cuba. The stores are all handled through dollars. So what people do is they send money from here to there, and that is what people use to purchase. Unfortunately, one of the worst things is that there's little hope in Cuba because unlike here where we have our disagreements on the importance of the Second Amendment and its limitations, the reality is that there are no guns for the people to defend themselves. The police and the military, they have all the guns, they have all the power, and of course they treat everybody within that niche very, very well. And one last thing that I want to bring up, because I know we want to try to keep this short, within the last week, 5 generals in Cuba have mysteriously died. So they're not releasing the cause of death for any of these people. It's simply 5 generals dead within the last week. Things have really gotten extremely bad. And what little refuge the Communist Party has is just extortion and forced upon people, because if you don't show up to protest for the Communist Party, they'll take away your career. They'll make it so you can't graduate. You have to be able to pass your military service in order to get a career in Cuba. And they're threatening you with that line. And you have videos of 14, 15-year-old kids out there risking their lives for the government that's ultimately crushing them down. That's my small part of what I've been seeing and gathering from Cuba. And again, thank you, Mr. Ellison, for allowing us to have this platform and speak out on these incredibly important issues.
Thank you so much. Nancy, how does it make you feel to hear what Anil is saying right now? What is that like for you?
I think I'm feeling what a lot of us here are feeling, helplessness, anger, frustration, and heartbreak, because I'm seeing the same videos, I'm getting the same messages. You know, we are seeing straight from the island. This is not, you know, by proxy, someone else is telling us something here. We are hearing it straight from them and seeing it straight from them. And, you know, we're not hearing urban legends. You know, growing up in the United States with a Cuban family, you hear the stories, you hear the family lore, you hear all the things about what goes on in Cuba. But up until very recently, you know, I'd say the wonderful thing and the awful thing is social media, right? Social media has actually helped to bring awareness. Without social media, we wouldn't know first. We would just hear rumors. And, you know, we don't want to deal in rumors. We don't want to deal in conjecture and speculation. And that's one of the things that's very frustrating, is people are still listening to rumors and still listening to conjecture. People are thinking that there are pro-government protests that are, you know, bigger than the anti-government protests. And that's because that's what the Cuban government is forcing on people. They are forcing people, like Anil just said, you know, forcing people to support the Cuban government with the threat of losing everything. So when the Cuban media releases that information, so many people take it as gospel because that's all they know. You know, so it's very frustrating to see all of these things. We're seeing people dying in their homes and being left there for days, having to be carried out by their family members to a waiting wagon in the street because no one is treating their family members. No one is coming for them. You know, people are being pulled out of their homes and they're disappearing by the hundreds, by the thousands probably. You know, children are being forced to fight against their family members with the threat of, you know, losing everything or worse, losing their life. People are being murdered for speaking out. And with all the problems that we do have in the United States, we're not a perfect country. We do have the freedom to speak out against, and the people in Cuba, the phrase that was used, you know, that it's illegal to speak out. To me, the word illegal isn't even the tip of the iceberg of, it's not the most accurate description, because you think illegal, you think, oh, you might get a ticket, you might go to jail, but their lives are at stake for speaking out, their very lives. So illegal doesn't even begin to describe what it is that they're experiencing, and it's heartbreaking. Thank you.
In our last discussion, one of the gentlemen said that the Cuban people he said that they're so hungry that they have literally eaten up their fear in order to go protest. And that is the thing that really stuck out to me. That's the thing that brought chill bumps on my arm, because I realized in that moment that you have to be in a situation that is so dire, so severe, that you're willing to risk your life to protest. And that's what made me want to have this public discussion. Raymond, is this a conversation that is dominant in your house right now because of the protests?
It's not. And I'll tell you why it's not. It's not because the misconception right now in the American media is that the images that we're receiving from Cuba have just begun. This has been the reality on the island since the takeover of the Castro regime. And my grandfather, who was a political prisoner like Amori for 10 years, for just disputing a property claim, because he worked on boats, and my grandmother was in the United States. Um, she lost all contact to the island because her father was that contact on the island. And so I'm the first to tell you, my grandma speaks no Spanish at all because she didn't have anyone to speak it with. Because being Black and Cuban in Miami in the 60s was not something that was very popular. But what I can tell you is that this is very popular in the streets of Hialeah, which is where I grew up too, in Miami Gardens. I mean, it's hard pressed now not to find walking in the streets or driving around, not seeing a Cuban flag anywhere. And it's because our people are very proud people. And we do come from one of the beautiful islands, most beautiful islands in the Caribbean, in the world at that. But the issue, Alan, is this. We have allowed ourselves to be consumed with the protests in Hialeah and in Miami, in all across the United States. And we have forgotten the actual protests that are happening on the island. And like you just alluded to just a couple minutes ago, people are literally dying in the streets, not only from being shot, but they are dying from hunger. They are dying from COVID, lack of medicine. And the American left tries to downplay this and say it's because of the embargo. It's not because of the embargo that this is happening. It's happening because you have a brutal dictatorship in Cuba that has existed over 62 years that has stifled the progress of Cuba, that is actively killing and arresting doctors when they should be practicing on Cuban people to get them better health. They are shipping vaccines to different countries, shipping doctors to different countries, and overcharging for food, and then saying it's the American government's fault. It's not. And so what we have to do is we have to make sure that we are facilitating that change to lift the embargo, but most importantly, that we are making every active measure to get Americans in Cuba, on the island, to ensure that we are making sure that Cuban people in Cuba are getting access to food. They are getting access to medicine and COVID vaccines. Because if we don't, the drastic effects that are happening in Cuba will continue to persist because what we've already seen in the last 62 years is the Cuban government does not care. And if you dare to disagree with them, you'll either be in jail or you'll be in the grave. That is the reality of Cuba right now. That has always been the reality of Cuba. And now is the time that the Cuban people are saying that we've had more than enough. But right now, the Cuban people, more than anything, need our help. And it's our job to deliver that help.
Thank you very much. Amari, what about you in your household? What's that conversation like at house?
So mine is the opposite. And I want to acknowledge the privilege in that, in being a white Cuban and not having had the same experience Raymond did, where there was an erasure of that heritage because of what was happening and continues to happen in our country with Black lives. But in my house, it's all we talk about. My grandmother lived her trauma to me every day. She tells me that just eating a plate of food is a triggering remander of how much she didn't have in Cuba. And what's crazy is that she was a very educated person. She got her doctorate in, she taught at the University of Havana. She went to school for the sole purpose of doing something more for her family and for her future generations. And even then was still struggling to feed her kids. And this notion that Cuba is this beautiful utopia where everyone is fed in exchange for services is bullshit, for lack of another term, because you have doctors who can't feed their kids. So you have people that are educated in Cuba, but it's it's not worth it if your basic needs aren't being met. And that is the situation. Like all of us have been saying, this is not the first time that Cuba's been struggling. Cuba's been struggling since 1959 when the coup came in and took over, and people like our family members were forced out. People who fought and were professionals and were educated and just wanted a better life for themselves and other people. So in my family, it's all we talk about, because for the first time, this idea that Cuba time is coming back up. For so long, we thought that there was just no way it was going to happen. Obviously, we talked about it, but it just seemed so far-fetched. And on July 11th, to have seen the whole country stand up. And like you said, Alan, the statement is they were so hungry they ate their fear. Like, to see people say, I know I'm going to die, so I'd rather die fighting for my freedom, is just something that I don't think any of us expected to happen during this time. Like, I would cry and like dream of the day that I could gift my grandma a free Cuba, but I had no idea how I was going to do it. And I was like, there has to be a way, there has to be a way. And like, being American, being on this side is just so easy for me to wave my flag and go home and go to sleep and not worry about my life being threatened. And I'm imagining the people on the island fighting for that. It's a very emotional time, I think, for any Cuban who's either connected to the island or loves their people, because I think hope has been in us, and we don't know where it's going, but the hope is there, and my hope is that it doesn't end here.
Thank you very much. Anil, you put something in the chat. Can you go ahead and speak to that real quick?
So, okay. Yeah, so there's kind of this issue where the Cubans that have been living in Hialeah for 60 years, 30 years, and the people that live in Cuba have a very different mentality. Like, the people that live here, first of all, the people that left 60 years ago, they were the ones that were doing great in Cuba, right? Like, they had enterprises, they had businesses, they were doing fairly well. That's why they had the money to move over here. And the whole revolution happened because, like, the majority of the people in Cuba were actually, they couldn't even read. It was even worse than it is now. Like, I know it's really, really bad now, but Batista was a monster beyond anything that we really can grasp today. Like, he literally had scores of Cubans that couldn't read. That really, really was no food. There was no infrastructure, nothing, right? And there was like a small group of Cubans at the time that had power, that had money. And a lot of those are the ones that came over here. And those are like the ones that have the strongest Republican like base, right? When you hear a lot of the rah-rah Republican, communism bad, socialism bad, no matter what shape, what forms it takes, a lot of the Cuban people are from that, portion of it. People in Cuba, they come in different ranges because there's a lot of oppression, a lot of things wrong. The dictatorship has got to go. I don't want to sound like I'm defending them in any shape, way, or form. I just want to establish that there's like a different levels in Cuba than people here think, because there are people doing well. There are people that have nice cars. There are people that, travel and all that stuff. It's just that the only people that have that luxury are the ones connected to the power. Those are going to be the people that are in high government, the people that are, generals, sons of generals, things like that. But there's a lot of people like that. They have the power. They, so there's a very diverse mix of people within Cuba that still like socialism, that still like some of the things that communism does. Because let's be real, like, you don't pay rent, you don't pay gas, you don't pay electricity, you don't really pay for anything. Yeah, you don't have anything, but you don't pay for anything. And to some people, that mentality is addictive. And that state of like, I don't really have to do anything, but the government will take care of me, is appealing. And there are people that are in there kind of fighting for it. So I just think we need to make sure we know that the Cubans in Miami, Hialeah, and the Cubans in Cuba, it can be a very different mentality throughout that. But I definitely agree that the government in Cuba right now is just like way past any kind of redemption. And I would like to give some time to some solutions, some maybe things that we could do, because I've thought about this and it seems to me there's three solutions. One, that the US comes in and does some military action in Cuba, which isn't going to happen because, you know, Russia, China, we're also not just going to go invade a country that's right next to us. So that's really not going to happen. Two, the Cuban people take the country back, but there's no weapons in Cuba. So how are the Cuban people going to fight back? Or three, the dictatorship just surrenders the power peacefully. But 5 generals just died. So I don't think they're really wanting to do that too much. So right now, I think the real thing that the government here in the United States could do is use that embargo maybe as a leveraging tool to start easing the situation in Cuba with concessions from the Cuban government. If we can get real concessions, real solid concessions that takes away some of that dictatorial power from the empire, from the Cuban government, if we can take some of that away and help the Cuban people a little bit, do both of those with this embargo that we have. We have a lot of power in there. There's a lot of sanctions. I've gone over, I believe it's over 214 sanctions that the United States has on Cuba. Surely some of those could be used as a tool to take away some power that the Cuban government has. Short of that, I really would like to hear some other solutions if anybody else has some, but I really want to, you know, not just spend time talking about the problem, but hopefully talking about a solution and something that we can do to make the situation for the Cuban people better as soon as possible.
Thank you. Nancy, what are some of the things that you would like to see happen in terms of American involvement, whether it be citizens or our government? How do you think we could help?
Well, there's a few things that I want to specifically, what Ennio said, I like that idea that you had mentioned about basically exploiting the embargo to help the Cuban people. I think there's been just kind of a uniform mentality, more often from a certain group of people than others. Lift the embargo and the problem goes away. And that's not the reality, because the embargo is not the problem. Is the embargo troublesome? Sure. Does it need to be addressed? Absolutely. But that is not the problem. And I think, again, I agree. I don't think, I would like to see military action, but I agree. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know that it's necessarily for fear of entering or engaging in kind of a conflict with Russia or China, because honestly, personally, from my standpoint, and this is at the risk of sounding somewhat jaded and distrusting, I don't believe that the United States will get involved in a military way if there's no money to be made. There's no money to be made to fight over Cuba, so it's not going to happen. That's just my personal thought on it. That's what I would like to see, though, military intervention. And, you know, the people of Cuba, they're doing everything they can. I don't know how much steam they have left. They're fighting with every last breath they have, but like you said, they're unarmed. They have nothing. You know, Cuba has not, in the entirety of Cuba's history, they've never been really truly free since the indigenous people of Cuba. Since Spain came and planted their flag, there has never been a free Cuba. There's been various incarnations of what we're seeing today. And the only reason why Castro was able to come to power was because Batista was so horrible and also ran away with his tail between his legs. Castro did not win Cuba. Castro did not win a war. There was no war. There was a couple little fights, and Castro took advantage. He manipulated the media. I think exploiting the embargo, and I'm sorry, that's not the right word. It's a negative word, but you know, using the embargo to help the Cuban people might be something that may work. I personally would like to see less of the embargo talk from the left. And for the record, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm independent. Very rarely have I voted Republican. But the problem that I'm seeing from this standpoint, from where I'm sitting, is we need to have as many people on the same page as what's going on in Cuba as possible. And the problem here that we're seeing here in the United States is the media and left-leaning politicians are all jumping on this lift the embargo bandwagon. And what that ends up doing is it causes this divide. It makes it about US politics, because you see Republicans saying the right things. They're, you know, they agree or not, they're saying the right things. They're actually speaking truth about what is happening. And then I'm hearing from Democrats, you know, we got to lift the embargo. It's cruel to the human people, and it's to the Cuban people rather, and it's kind of tone deaf. It's tone deaf to the reality. It's almost like the Cuban people are not being heard. They're not being listened to. Saying that the problem that is happening in Cuba right now is caused by the embargo is the equivalent or close to saying that the Black Lives Matter protests last summer were caused by counterfeit currency in Minneapolis. It's like, it makes no sense. It's a problem, it's a thing, but that's not the issue. And that's not why people are fighting to the death for freedom. I would like to see some more uniformity in what our politicians are saying, what people in power here in the United States are saying, and doing what you're doing today, Allen, which is listening to people that are amplifying the voices of people in Cuba, not using the talking points and parroting back what everybody's saying, which is lift the embargo, freeze the people. That's the problem. Let's start with that. I think would be really a good stepping point. Getting everybody on the same page would be nice.
Thank you. Amari, you had your hand up. Can you go ahead and speak to that?
Yes, Nancy, you hit so many good points, and now my brain is everywhere. I think it's so important to understand that the conversation about Cuba is so nuanced on so many levels. One, none of us live in Cuba right now, so we are speaking from an American perspective or a Cuban American perspective. Two, I believe that we keep looking at this situation in a very binary way. Some people either think either Cuba's bad and the dictatorship is bad, or the US is bad. And my thought is that there's two bad guys here. There's the crappy stuff that the Cuban regime has done to its people, and the blockade that is placed within the country, where Cubans can't even go to their own beaches because the regime has blocked them from having access to their own resources. Cubans don't have Cuban coffee. We have to send them Cuban coffee from the United States. Like, there's a blockade within the country. And then there's also the reality that the embargo has really made the situation worse, in my opinion. So I think it's, how do we acknowledge that there's two bad guys here? And it actually, and I'm aligned with lifting the embargo only because, one, I think it's just a violation of human rights. But two, the Cuban dictator, Díaz-Canel, keeps hiding behind the embargo. His whole argument during this time is things are bad in Cuba because of the Americans, because of the Americans, because of the embargo. And I feel like it's a cop-out. It's easy to blame it on the embargo and not acknowledge what's happening internally. So I think it's important to realize that there's more than one thing happening here and that all things should be addressed. I personally don't believe in military intervention because, as Nancy said, Cuba has been fighting for their freedom from the beginning of time and has never been a sovereign nation. And I think if the US comes in, there are going to be strings attached to that, and then Cuba will continue to exist as a place that is not its own. And people on the streets are not asking for military intervention in Cuba. They are asking for freedom. They're asking to be heard. They're asking for their own government to listen to them and change what's happening. So I think it's important to acknowledge all those pieces that are happening. And I can say a lot more, but I'm gonna make sure Raymond has time to speak too. So thank you, Nancy, for bringing up that very hard conversation, because it's become binary and it's not. And Cuba's not a utopia. And there's a lot of reasons why they've painted that picture, because they've had control of their story for decades.
Thank you. Raymond, what do you think that Americans can do to help citizens and the government?
Well, I think that what citizens can do first and foremost is stop making this Cuba issue about them. It's not about them. Cubans in Miami are no longer entitled to anything. I say that as a Cuban living in Miami. The American government and living in America, it's a complete different reality than living in Cuba. Now, for Cuban Americans that might be here on visas or work permits, that's a completely different question. But for Cuban Americans that are living in America, that have citizenship, that voted both either Democrat or Republican, we're not working for them. We are working for Cubans on the island. And I think that we must always remember that. Second, I think a military intervention is absolutely the worst possible thing that we can do for Cubans. We have seen time and time again where military interventions don't work because it's how the Communist Party rallies up their base into saying the United States is trying to invade, the United States is trying to take over Cuba, the United States is trying to do X, Y, and Z. I don't think a military intervention helps in any way because not only are we going into Cuba blindsided because we don't have a whole lot of intelligence coming off the island. I know Enil said earlier about the 5 generals that are dead. But there are people that might argue and say that they're not even sure if the generals are dead. And not having that type of, and not to dispute Enil, because he probably gets more news from the island than I do. But the reality is that the United States government doesn't really know exactly what's happening on the island. They don't have confirmed data. And invading a country or causing military intervention without having all the facts, I think Allen and everyone here who are stewards of history have known that we just have a very bad habit of doing that and not being good for us any at all. And so if we walk into Cuba blindsided, then we don't know who it is that we're there to get. We don't know who we are there to, provide for. And as a result, it makes the situation on the island for Cubans worse than it is now. Then second, to the embargo. I definitely think that the embargo has to be lifted, but it cannot be lifted until the Cuban regime complies with the demands of the American government. And I say that because if we just lift the embargo, then it gives the communist regime all the leeway in the world to do whatever it is they like. So we can lift the embargo and make the situation temporarily better. But how much better does it get if we are only emboldening dictator Diaz-Canel? How much better does it get if we are emboldening him not to hold free elections? If we are emboldening him to continue stifling the press? If we are emboldening him not to release prisoners that are in jail simply for speaking out? And I think that type of emboldening is what has given the Communist Party in Cuba their mandate for doing their work. I know Tamori that said it earlier when she said that Diaz-Canel is continuing to fall back on the fact that the situation in Cuba is bad because of the embargo, and that might be true too. But and actually, it's not true. I didn't mean to say that it's not true because it is true. The embargo is bad in Cuba. It has not allowed for a lot of resources to come on the island that should come to the island. Prior to Fidel Castro and the embargo, Cuba was the world's largest sugar producer. I can talk to that because before my grandfather started working on boats, he was a sugar farmer, as many people that were poor in Cuba were. And he just came from that generation as an Afro-Cuban, coming off of that, coming out of the Spanish-American War and all of that. And I think that was just the reality of Cuba at the time. But what we have to realize is that the embargo and military interventions are just what Diaz-Canel wants us to do. We're literally playing in his hands. We continuously talk about those things and forget to talk about the realities of Cuban people on the island right now. What we should be doing, Alan, is we should be figuring out the best ways to get aid into Cuba. Be that food, be that medicine, be that COVID vaccines, getting doctors in Cuba, making sure that they're protected. We need to use our military base in Cuba to the best of our advantage and see if we can deploy troops, not to be hostile, but like we've seen over and over again, to get into Cuba and deliver to the people the necessities of what they need right now. I think that the issues right now that we're facing puts us at a crossroad. And it puts us at a crossroad because of this. We have the option to deliver aid to the Cuban people and to deliver them their freedom. But they both coincide because they're both equally important. But what we also have to remember is that Cuban people are dying right now. And we have to deliver for the Cuban people at this moment. And we also have to give them their freedom. So I think that that's something for you to take up, Alan. Make that bold solution. How we best do that while also serving the Cuban people. And my solution, and I don't think that there is any clear solution, because it's a complex problem, one that's existed over 62 years. But if we can make the conscious efforts, the proactive efforts right now to start getting those resources on the island. I know with Cubanos Palante, we're doing a lot of work, helping out a whole bunch, and getting those resources to the islands the best way that we can. And if other people can join us in that, I think that that is the best way that we serve the Cuban people right now. Agitating the dictator doesn't do that, because he still has all the power in Cuba, and he's still going to kill people, whatever we say, because he doesn't care. He's shown that over and over again. I don't think that continuing to talk about the embargo and military intervention, because it's only a distraction from the actual issues at hand. So, like I said, this is but this is a complex problem. It's never going to be a clear-cut solution, but we can take corrective measures to get the people what they need and what they deserve, but more importantly, what they're asking for. And I think that should reframe the conversation.
Thank you very much. You know, one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation is because there are people that I have been speaking with that have echoed these same sentiments. The fact that the media is not accurately portraying the actual issues that the people on the ground are dealing with. And the thing is, and I think it was Malcolm X who said, "He who controls the media controls the people." I believe that was Malcolm X. But if Americans are getting the wrong ideas, if they're getting the wrong information, then it doesn't truly help the cause. And that's why we wanted to have this conversation. Nancy, I saw your hand was up. Can you go ahead and speak to what it is that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on a couple. Firstly, with regards to the embargo is not as restrictive as people think. Yes, there are many restrictions, but it does not limit humanitarian aid. It does not include food aid. Our telecom industry can freely go there. It's the Cuban regime that's preventing those things from getting to the people. So the embargo, in that capacity, the embargo is not the issue, because the Cuban government has deliberately rejected aid and medicine, and they control everything that comes into the island. So lifting the embargo, all it does is give the Cuban regime more things to control and give them more control over what's distributed to the people. The issue is not going to be resolved by lifting the embargo. Now, again, like I said earlier, lifting the embargo definitely is something that needs to be explored, but that is a conversation that is not helpful to resolving the issue right now. When I say military intervention, and forgive me for not being clear, I don't mean going in and invading. I don't mean going in and bombing the place. I don't mean any of that. I mean exactly what you suggested, Raymond. You know, going in with our troops to deliver the aid, to go in there and circumvent any restrictions that the Cuban regime will prevent that aid from getting to the people. Now, I don't know logistically how that's possible. I'm not going to speak to that because I don't know anything about military procedure in that capacity, but that's what I mean when I say military intervention. I don't mean going in and occupying. I think the embargo is not as problematic as people believe it is, because we've, again, in Miami, we've grown up hearing how bad the embargo is, and depending on what side you fall on the issue, you'll hear the stories of how the embargo affects what. And we are learning, because we have access to this information, the embargo is not preventing humanitarian islands from getting to the people. Rather, the Cuban government is. The Cuban government is the problem. The solution is doing something about the Cuban government. Maybe it's Enio's suggestion, somehow manipulating or exploiting or reworking or using the embargo to do that effectively.
Thank you.
That's what I want to say.
Anita, I want to pose this question to you. If we were to somehow get food, get medication, resources, utilize whatever technological advancements we have to open up internet and telecommunication services for the people on the island, would they still continue to protest for freedom and liberty, or would that argument go away?
That's a good question. It's a challenging question. I would say yes, they would probably stop protesting. So like Nancy keeps saying, like, yes, the embargo is not the end all be all, but as others have pointed out, it does hurt. And I was born in Cuba, and maybe that's why my connection with some of the people in Cuba, it's like a little bit stronger. Like, I have people that live there right now that I still talk to on a regular basis. And when Obama lifted the sanctions, things got noticeably better in Cuba. Phones started rolling out, like people started getting like their own small businesses rolling. Like, my own friends started making like small hairstylist places and things like that. And it was definitely once COVID hit that like the sanctions that had been reimposed by Donald Trump started taking effect again. And once COVID hit, it really escalated things to the point of desperation that they are in now. I do not think the people would be out protesting and really going and risking their lives to protest if the situation hadn't gotten this bad. And honestly, I don't necessarily think that just the US bringing food and bringing water is going to help anything really more than just right now, because the Cuban government does have means of like getting food, and they are shipping out doctors to other countries. They are shipping out vaccines. They are doing these things to maintain the image of a superior healthcare system while internally letting things collapse. So while I do believe that the people need help, I don't think that just giving them internet and rations, like people in Cuba have a VPN. People in Cuba aren't dumb. Like the government has to shut down the power system to cut off the internet. They don't want to do that either. So they're doing that, every once in a while when things get really bad. The internet thing isn't really going to help. Food and water is bad, but what we really need is to twist the government's arm and to really get them to step down on at least some of these core powers. That's why I believe the sanctions that we have can be leveraged in a way that we can get some good we can get some good declarations from the Cuban government to loosen some of that power. Or maybe we could even do, something where we have like, I don't know, bonuses for Cuba or something like that. But just going straight back to your question, the internet isn't really going to help out much. We have internet, we have VPNs. We don't really need it that much. It's really not that big a deal. Food we need, medicine we need, but the government could get those things. We need to get the Cuban government to change what it's actually saying and to what it's actually doing. And I believe one of the ways we have to do that would be through either the lifting of sanctions or maybe some kind of beneficial trade deals. But again, no, I don't believe if we just give them water, and if we just fix the situation temporarily, I don't think the same vital drive to go into the streets and protest for this. It hasn't happened for 60 years. It really only got this bad because it's a life and death situation in the island for everyone from top to bottom right now. That's my personal belief on that.
Thank you very much. I want to address something that you said earlier. You said that there are at least 5 generals that have died. Prior to the last town hall on the state of Cuba, I was speaking to a Cuban American physician, and he told me that one of the generals decided to leave the military of Cuba because the government was forcing them to kill Cuban citizens if they did not join the military. And he decided that he wasn't going to turn his weapon on his own people and that he was going to leave the military. The Cuban American physician told me that he put his life in jeopardy by doing that. So to hear you tell me that 5 Cuban generals have died, it speaks to the idea or the fact that in that same conversation, they said that because Cuban generals were not willing to do what the government was asking them to do, they started hiring sicarios, which is contract killers, to come in and start killing people who were protesting, killing people who would not join the military. I know that you travel the world doing interviews and writing and things of that nature on this issue. Whenever you have gone into other parts of the world, are you hearing these types of conversations come from people outside of America? And are people outside of America willing to do whatever they can to help put pressure on the Cuban government? Like, is this the conversation that you're having? And is this the sentiment of people outside?
There's only 2 countries where the Cuban sentiment is as strong or close to as strong as it is here. We're in a special situation in Florida. We're 90 miles from Cuba. Cuba's closer to Miami or to Key West than to Orlando. You know, Miami, Orlando, further away. So we have a very close connection. But Mexico City is a place that has always had a strong commitment to the Cuban people. And Spain, these are both places to where Cubans immigrate very, very often. And both these countries have good relations with Cuba. And I would say if you are a politician looking for allies on this issue, those countries would be places where you might find yourself some allies.
Okay. Raymond had to leave, but before we wrap this up, I wanted to give each and every one of you an opportunity to share any information that you want to be able to share, whether it be websites, social media pages, with our audience. This has been a very in-depth conversation, as I wanted it to, because, you know, it's something that we're not having discussions on in mainstream media, and we want to be able to what's going on, and not only what's going on, but the various options on how we can help, how we can play our part. So in this last few minutes, I want to give each and every one of you at least 30 seconds to share anything that you want to share with the public. And we're going to start with Amari.
Well, first I want to thank you so much, Mr. Ellison, for having us here, for continuing the conversation. I am one of the co-founders of Guanos Palante, spelled this way. Palante means forward, moving our people forward. And we have been gathering donations to support people on the island. Obviously, it's been very hard to support people on the island, so our efforts right now have been focused on recargas, which is recharging Cuban data plans so that people can continue to communicate on the ground, ideally organizers on the ground that are getting resources to people that need it in different areas of Cuba. And projects, we have a couple of activists on the ground that we're working directly with, but we have to be very careful because their lives are at risk if we reveal names or things like that. So if you have a chance, please check us out. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And we are hoping to just continue to create a community of progressive Cubans that really want to see all people free, and we want to start elevating and uplifting the voices of Black and Brown and LGBTQ Cubans who have been mostly erased from our stories and need the space because they're the ones actually leading the efforts on the ground.
Thank you so much. We're going to have Nancy at this time. Can you please share anything that you would like to share? And please drop your social media handles if you can.
Okay, so the organization I would like to share, I'm not affiliated with them, but they are doing some really good work. They are Cuba AMP on Instagram. They were founded by a group of Cuban Americans. Some of them are artists, and their goal is to amplify the voices of people in Cuba. And what they are doing right now is they are focusing on translating videos from Spanish to English so they can be more accessible. That's one of tune out. When they don't understand, they just kind of tune it out. So that's one of the things that they are doing. Cuba AMP, they're nonprofits, and I can be found on Instagram at Nansanity Official. I share a lot of the videos that I see from the different organizations. I share a lot of your stuff, Amore, and anything that I try to steer away from mainstream media stuff, just because I want to share things that come straight from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better term. And I try very hard to share only things that are verifiable. I don't always succeed, but I try. So I think that's one of the organizations that I think is doing a lot of good work to help amplify the voices and get the word out there to as many people as possible on every side of the political spectrum.
Thank you very much. And Enio, you have the last 30 seconds.
You're on mute. That whole moment.
My bad. Thanks for letting me know. So I want to give everyone Ron DeSantis' office phone number. That is Ron DeSantis' office phone number is 850-717-9337. And Marco Rubio's office, that is 407-254-2573. Call your representatives if you are in Florida. The most important thing that we can do is pressure the people that have the power, that make the decisions, that make the moves. At the end of the day, we can sit and we can talk, but they are the ones that are going to end up doing anything. If they do anything, it'll be them, not really us, but we can push them to do the right thing. So call your representatives every single day. Let them know what's going on with the issues. Let them know that they sure love to take advantage of communism and socialism whenever they need our votes. But when it's time to actually do something for the Cuban people, where they at? Talking about internet and stuff. Not good enough. Not good enough, Rubio. Not good enough, DeSantis. We need action. We need something to really happen. So please, everyone, go ahead and give them a call. If you guys want to follow me, you can at Alex Leyva. And that is ALEXLEYVA. That's where I post more of like my political stuff. And if you want to see more of a photography side of me, Latin Shinobi. So again, thank you so much, Mr. Ellison. I really appreciate your time. Amore, Nancy, everybody involved. Thank you guys so much for coming here and speaking about the atrocious situation in Cuba. And I know that we're all feeling a little frustrated. We all wish we could do more, but coming on, talking about the issues is definitely a big help. Thank you so much, Allen Ellison. We'll be following you closely for the rest of your campaign. We hope to be seeing more from you. This is honestly incredible. We really appreciate it. And we hope you continue the way you have. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate each and every one of you taking the time to be here with us as we go into this discussion about the state of Cuba. I want to thank my panelists for being here. My name's Allen Ellison, running for the United States Senate. I got into this race to make a difference. I got into this race to help improve the quality of lives for everyone, even those that live outside of the country, which is why we're having this conversation today. And so if there is anything that I can do to help raise the awareness on the issues that matter most to you, your family, and your friends, then please join our campaign and let me know what's on your mind. Join our Fridays for Florida virtual discussions on Facebook and Instagram Live. And if you're on Twitter, then join us on Twitter for our Power Hour chat. I always like to hear from you because your voices and your thoughts, they matter to me. It's the one thing that we don't see enough of in our government, and that is responsive and engaging leaders. If I don't know who you are, if I don't know what keeps you up at night, then how can I effectively represent your interests? That is why we have these town halls, so that we can learn, we can listen, and we can grow together so that we can bring about those positive changes that you and your family so desperately need. And it's so important that we learn to listen, because if we can listen, we can learn. And I believe that we have more in common than not. It's just a matter of who's willing to listen to find those common threads that we can use to bind together and move forward from. Again, my name's Allen Ellison, running for the United States Senate. Thank you all very much. You have a wonderful night.